Okay, good day. Welcome back. This is the next video in my series on edge cases, and that's where I look at end games where there's sort of a transition zone where the winning side can win if they're on the move, but on the other hand, the defensive side can draw. And by looking at these edge cases, we then understand the threats from the stronger side and the defensive techniques from the weaker side. Now, today I'm looking at one of the most fascinating cases of this, the so-called Vancura position with the Romanovsky drawing zone. So let's get right into the action. Quickly look at the Wikipedia page. This is from Rook Endgame's Wikipedia, crowded the screen, but this is the Vancura position. You can see the diagram there. Basically, it is rook pawn on the 6th rank. That's normally the position which we're looking at. And what you're seeing there is the Vancura drawing position, which we'll understand a little bit better with your rook on f6, and that gives checks from the side, so that whenever the white king gets to sort of hold the pawn and threaten to release the rook, the black king checks ad infinitum. Now, we've seen the previous position with the rook pawn on the 7th rank, and we saw that the drawing technique there was checking from the 1st rank, because there's no place for the white king to hide. In this case, there is a place for the white king to hide. So as we'll see, we'll go on chessboard in a second, there's no way that black can't passively defend from the 1st rank. He has to get to the, f6 is the classic square, and it's a sort of more like a short side defense. You're checking from one side. Now, the background here is Vancura. That was a guy, Joseph Vancura, died young, and he had an analyzed position in 1924. And then if we look at it further down, what we're going to look at is this drawing zone, which was given by Romanovsky in 1950. And you can see the thing, if black is to move, they can draw, only if the white king is on a marked square. Now, what happens is there's obviously then, if the white king is on the edge of those white dots and it is white to move, well, then the black is losing, and that's what we're going to investigate. So what I might do now, and load up here, here's the board, is pre-Vancura position. I just want to give the gist of the defensive technique in the Vancura position before we look at the edge cases. As I say, the idea is that we want to get to the f6 square. Now, remember that we've looked at the position with the pawn on the 7th rank, and the black king has to stay in these two squares, or be within one move of that square, because if the black king moved to, let's say, there, which is bad, then white could push his pawn, and we've got back to that position where it's a skewer. Now, the problem with that is that if black is on a7, then he can't get back in time. So that sort of restricts the zone of the black king. Now, as I said, defensive, just sort of standing back passively, not going to work here. The white king will move across. The white king will simply move to that square, and because the black king can't defend, there'll be a simple process of moving the rook out and advancing the pawn. So black must do something. Now let's have a look at what the drawing technique is. Let's say his white king's in the worst position it can be, and the white king just starts moving across. Now if the white king stays on the bottom there, the drawing technique is as follows. Move your rook up here. If white keeps on trying to advance, check, and we've got the Vancura position. We're on the f6 square already, total draw. So let's go back, and let's say white is a bit cleverer and goes this way. Just place the move. We can do something very similar. I mean, there's different ways of drawing, rook a4, rook a5, and so on, but we can still, in this position, we've got plenty of time. We check and move across. Now, you might think that we've got some issues here, because white can move to f5, for instance, and we can't hold this position because there's a rook sacrifice threat, and then, for instance, jack will be forced to take, white takes, and it'll be losing. But what we do is we just hover backwards and forwards, and then you can see that, as soon as I don't know what to do here, move our king somewhere. None of this is absolutely right, but this is the idea. Now you just check forever. So that's the gist of the drawing technique in the Vancura position. Now we can also go through one extra line here. Let's, you can see I've left up that analysis by Keres. Let's set up his position, right? And let's read through what Keres says. This the white king is inside the drawing zone, so let's have a look. So rook c1. Well, let's do it the other way. It's suggested. Let's go back. We'll do a simpler way. we'll see a lot of these later in. Black has an alternative and perhaps even simpler drawing method in rook a5. So let's kind of cut the white king off. Obviously, the king marches across. Rook c5. Now, so black's threatening rook c6. That will be it, right? Let's have a look at this line with rook b8. Right? It looks like the rook's been released. Yeah. Now we go behind it again. What's he going to do? Rook b6, otherwise make no progress. And the key here is that the rook will march across. Not a lot white can do about it. Let's see, there was another line in there. Rook a7 check was actually the line I was giving. Ideas here. If you see in this line, it's saying king g6, king f6. Unfortunately, what happens is that the rook sneaks around to the h file, and kind of you get that skewer problem as a winning technique. So you've got to stay up to the side of the board. Rook b7, so that's getting the pawn going. Step behind it, and there's two. You see rook b6 check is one line, king f7, king d4, king e7, king runs across. So it's suggesting push the pawn. And now what do we do? It's just going to be both kings marching across, not much else to go along. March across, march across, march across, march across, and then rook goes back down there. Now what's white going to do? The king can't approach this way effectively because he'll just be checked forever because there's no escape square. The king's doing a very good job of shouldering on these squares. Right, so that just gives you an idea. There's different slightly tricky drawing techniques for each of these edge squares. Now what I might do, program I've got, the script I've got running. Okay, here we go. So we've seen this before. You should understand exactly what it's doing. Remember the box at the top. So this is black to move, white side, white to win, right? So if we move the rook around, it tells me where the white king has to be for white to be winning. And you can see that's the reverse of the Vancura box, effectively, right? You can see that the white has to be very close in. And you can see how, actually, maybe we'll change it to side black, result draw. Be a bit more clear, right? So that's sort of showing it. And you can see I've very specifically highlighted, this is showing green squares are, fairly trivial draw. And in fact, black even has can play a null move, right? But the red squares are those edge cases, which we're going to look at in a bit more detail. Let's just move the rook around and see, it doesn't, if the rook's on the A file, it doesn't make a lot of difference. But if the rook's in different positions, then the zones change. In fact, if we're there, we're heading for f6. Basically if we're on f6, every position draws. That's pretty much what we're saying, right? And those red squares are saying, well, that means we need to give a check. We need to give a check, right? So you can see that, that's the f6 square is the best. If you're here, then you can see the issue. There's a few more squares popping up because we can't give checks. What we're doing is we're going to this square here. That's white. That's white to win, has to move, and that is black to draw. So I've done it before, but let's say in this position, black to move and drawing, just generate all the little lines, and it gives you the solution for each of them, right? So you can see if the current square is highlighted, which is a D2, and you can see the strategy there. It's actually quite a complicated one. D2, run across to C2, and it's saying the rook swings up to A3 and then swings across to H3 and then finally gets to the 6th rank. And that one's, it's you're not really getting to F6, or I guess you could get F6. So that's for that square. We'll look at this in more detail when we go to the analysis board, and you can see it's giving you the solution. Same idea here. This time you swing around the 4th rank and you get to the F6 square very, very quickly, right? And let's just continue, same idea, right? As the white king is running to the queen side, you quickly get to the F rank or sorry, the f file or the 6th rank. What I want to do is actually look at this weird one here. Why is this one a draw? Right? It's really surprising because it looks like the king is very close. And we'll look at this on the analysis board. But in this case, swing across to the H file, king goes to D7, and then you're on the 6th rank already, but it looks like you're just in time to get to the F6 square. Yeah. Anyway, let's look at that. So they're the drawing techniques, and we switch it to the white side, and we'll do that again. And what are the winning techniques? It's just the same thing, right? Because in this case, you can see white's a tempo ahead. So white runs up, pushes the rook away, and actually gets to the critical squares. So as I've done before, this has actually generated PGNs. So let me just let's do the white Vancura, white to move. Here's the position we're looking at. There's actually a couple of winning moves because rook a7 check also moves, but king c3, most logical line. Let's run over there. Now, what is black going to do? We saw that the computer suggested rook a4, fair enough, try and block the king. So now there's only 2 winning moves, rook a7 check, king b3, obviously it's the main one that they'll probably transpose. Can do rook a5 or rook a1. So now the problem is that the king can continue to move up. Yep, just a sort of null move. The king has got up there, right? So if you're on the if you can move king to c3, let's move on the next game, right? So seems like this would be too far away, but it's not. Only 1 winning move this one, king d3. Same defensive method, king c3. This time we're trying to run the rook over to the other side. Check. It's kind of like you can't hold. The king's going to make it up again, right? And that's another win. Right, so you can see that if it's on these edges, let's go to the next one. Here's another one. It's going to be the same, right? We'll quickly move through to this one, which we just looked at. How does white win here? So king is running across. Yeah, that's the win, right? Shows you how you do win. Okay, now let me load up the other file. What I'll do is I'll look at the other previous case. So I'll attach both of these files so that you can have a look at it. So this is black. How does black draw these positions? Now we're just going to flick through to that one I find the most interesting. Is a little. Now there's only one drawing line here, rook h1. So let's have a look at that. King d7, that makes sense. Let's run in there. So what's our strategy? Rook h6. We're now attacking the pawn, so that means the rook is not free to move. King keep moving across. Now we get rook f6. We've made it. We go there, we just check, check, check. That's it. So, but that's the way that you get there in time. Now, if we look at some of the other games, let's go back to the very first game. Now, actually, let me just bring the PGN across. You can't see that. This is showing you what I did this time is only for the first level. I should have done it recursively. Is that it used the table base to give you all the drawing lines for the first move. So you can see here it's suggesting rook a3, but rook f1 and rook b1 also both draw in this position. So let's pick the second one. Let's see how rook b1 draws, and just follow the line there. So king runs across. That makes sense. Rook b6. We're already in the Vancura position, right? So if we did rook f1. There's these transitions where, let's look, we're threatening to get back to Vancura straight away. So the only other alternative is actually to give a rook check. And it's not actually what the computer came up with. And then move the king g6 is often moved. Remember that threat, you don't want to move away to the f file by and large. And we're trying to sort of free up space for the pawn. But we've seen this happen before. Now the rook goes behind. Anyway, making progress is to push the pawn. And then now we come across, both are coming across, king e5, king b4. Actually doesn't lose the rook, you don't take the rook, king d6. And we've got this position again where white won't be able to make progress, because even if the white king got to the pawn, then black will have checks down the b file. That just gives you a sense of the different ways of getting to the Vancura position from those edge cases. So if you look at the edge cases we're looking at, let me just bring back up about 5 or 6 edge cases, and they all have a certain way of getting to a Vancura-like position, so there is a draw. And it's good to know those techniques, and the attached file I'll have, which you can see here. Let me just close it down a bit. This, go back to the first one, you can see each of these positions, like this was with the king on e2, and you can see there's a 3 draw and check. Oh, four draw. Rook a4, rook a3, rook c1, rook b1. They all draw. Yeah, get to the Vancura position pretty quickly, or if white reorganizes his pieces, the pawn on a7 and the rook on b7, then the black king is close enough to stop the white king from. The main threat would be the white king got to like the b8 square. Then you'd be in trouble, but can't jump through there. Now, I am going to leave that there today. I normally have been including examples from real play of these positions. And with Vancura, there's a lot of them. And if you remember in the Irv Alekhine World Chess Championship, there was a sort of a Vancura position, near Vancura position, which was played incorrectly. So I'll probably compose a few of those together and put together another video on Vancura position in the real world. Otherwise, I hope you found this quick sort of summary of the Vancura position interesting and entertaining. Thank you very much for watching.